I'm Yuko. I'm from Seaquaria Ocean Education, a division of World Fisheries Trust.
And I'm Aneka from the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea out in Sydney.
To celebrate Oceans Week Victoria, Aneka and myself will be exploring 2 beaches that you can find at southern Vancouver Island. One beach up in Sydney and one here in Victoria. And speaking of which, we are currently at Clover Point in Victoria, and we're standing on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. So Aneka has really good exploration technique. So she's bracing herself against the rock. She's making sure that has a good footing before she gently move the algae around. And we want to be very gentle when we're exploring because we don't know who might be living underneath the seaweed.
Like this blood star. Another one. We just found a little blood star just under the seaweed over there. And I'm going to turn it over so you can see what the tube feet look like on the bottom. Actually, they're so small you can barely see them, but all along the underside of the arms here. That's where all their little tube feet are, and that's how they grab onto the rocks.
So they have a central disc in the middle of their body, and as long as that central disc remains intact, they can lose their arms and regenerate them. Really cool adaptation for the rough ecosystem that is the intertidal zone.
Under this rock over here we have an ochre star. It's purple, and you can just see 2 of the arms here. And I love finding ochre stars on the beach. They're one of those classic species that I'm really excited to find. And you'll notice that it's on the underside of a rock right now. So that's one way that they make sure that they stay wet, so they don't want to dry out in the sun. So this is a really nice safe spot for them to make sure, that they don't dry out. And if you ever find one, you can just gently touch it with a finger here, and you can feel how spiny it is. So they have very, very spiny skin.
Sea stars are unable to move when they're out of the water because they require water to be pumped throughout their body in order to move. It's kind of like a water-powered engine. So when sea stars get abandoned by the tides, they often find a crevice to hide in where it's safe and they can stay nice and moist.
Okay, so we just found a sea lemon, which is a type of sea slug, also called a nudibranch, and it's just under here, so you really have to look to see it. But it's this yellow blob underneath the rock. And so nudibranchs are sea slugs. There's a lot of different kinds. This one eats sponge. We've seen a lot of sponge on this beach, so I was kind of hoping we would see a nudibranch today. Although I did not think I'd find one this early in the day, so I'm very excited. So if you see a sea lemon on the beach, because they have a soft body, you probably don't want to touch it because they're a little bit delicate, but take a picture of one because they are very exciting to see. So down there, that was some breadcrumb sponge, and that nudibranch we saw earlier, the sea lemon, this is the type of thing that sea lemon would like to eat.
Breadcrumb sponge are part of the animal group called porifera, and that means full of pores. And they are living animals despite their sedentary or unmoving nature.
Down here we have a mossy chitin, and so that's this animal right here that's really, really stuck onto the rock. So it's called a mossy chitin because it has this mossy looking bristly stuff on the outside. So it's kind of this oval shape. And mossy chitins are a type of chitin, so they are related to snails and other mollusks. So like snails you might have seen on land, they have one really big foot that they use to crawl around on the rocks. So we can't see the foot right now because it's on the bottom, but we can see what it has instead of a shell. So where a snail would have a spirally shell on top, the chitin has these 8 plates that go across its body. Okay, so down here we have some bull kelp that has washed ashore. And so this end here would be the top, and I'm going to pick it up so you can see a little better. So this is the bulb, so it's hollow inside, and this is what lets it float. So all of these fronds or blades that are coming out of the bulb, that is what the kelp uses for photosynthesis. So in that way, it's a little bit like a tree, doing photosynthesis and growing really, really tall. So bull kelp is one of the biggest kelp species in the world. But it's also a little bit different than a tree. So if we go all the way to the other end of this bull kelp, over here we have what's called the holdfast. And it's a little bit like roots, but not quite. So you can see that it's actually attached to the rock here. So I'm not going to try to rip it off, but it is very attached to this rock. And so like roots, it has a structural purpose. So this holdfast helps it to hold fast and stay put underwater. But unlike roots, it doesn't absorb any nutrients through the holdfast system. So it's just for structure, just for support. So any nutrients have to come from those fronds that we saw earlier. So I'm gonna put this back in the water because I see we have some animals living in this holdfast. In a kelp forest underwater, you'd have not just one of these pieces, but you'd have like hundreds of them. And so that makes this whole forest where, just like in a forest on land, you have lots and lots of trees. A kelp forest underwater has lots of different types of kelp and lots of them. And you have so many animals that live in the kelp forest. So things like little crabs, little fish, bigger things also use them. So herring, salmon will forage in kelp forests, and even bigger animals too. So seals and sea otters, and sometimes even whales might swim through.
One of my favorite animals, they don't look much like animals and a lot of people misunderstand them. And this animal is the barnacle. I think barnacles are one of the coolest animals on the planet because they don't start their life out with a hard shell. They are actually free-swimming larvae. They swim around the water column and to find their forever home. And once they find a suitable spot to settle on, they glue their heads to the substrate, which in this case is a rock. Sometimes it is the fins and the tails of a whale. And as soon as they cement their heads to the surface, they start secreting their shells. Believe it or not, barnacles are part of the same animal group as crabs. They are arthropods, which means they have segmented limbs. You can't really tell the barnacle is segmented because of these plates that they have that surrounds their soft body. But they have multiple plates that make up their shells. Their head is down at the bottom, which means their legs, their feet, is at the top.
Okay, so down here what we just saw were some aggregating anemones, so a local species of sea anemone. And right now they are all closed up, so they pull all their tentacles in when the tide goes out. So this lets them keep water inside so that they don't dry out. And what I really like about these ones is that you often find them in groups. And so they actually reproduce by cloning sometimes. And so they'll end up with this whole colony of clones that will actually fight neighboring colonies of clones. Another thing that you can kind of see on the beach when they are a little bit more open is that their mouth is in the middle on the top. So the tentacles are used to catch food and bring it into their mouth in the middle, but the mouth also functions as the anus, so waste also is expelled from the top.
Sea anemones also stick objects to their bodies, which helps them keep moisture in when the tide goes out.
This anemone down here actually has the tentacles out, and you can see them because it's in the water. And so even though they are a soft animal, this is one that you might be familiar with from seeing on the beach. And this one, it is okay to very, very gently touch the tentacles. So I'm going to use my one finger and I'm going to go really, really slow. You can just see how they almost stick to my finger a little bit.
And the stickiness that you feel when you touch the sea anemone's tentacles is because of their stinging cells or nematocysts. And that's how they stun their prey like plankton. Aneka and I are going to zip up to Sydney, up on the peninsula, to take a look at what kind of animals and algae species we're gonna find at the Sydney Glass Beach. And that is right by the aquarium, right?
It is. It's right behind it.
Yes. So we'll see everyone after this transition.
We are at Glass Beach out in Sydney, and you can see I have a lot of sea glass in my hand. And a lot of the glass here, which is all over the beach, comes from when there used to be a dump at the end of Evan Avenue. And the glass is mostly what remains from whatever was dumped back then. A lot of people do come here to look for sea glass, but there's also a lot of cool animals that we're going to find today.
It's about a 0.5 to 0.6 meter tide today, and as you can see, it is quite wet out. It is raining, so that will make our exploration really interesting because we get to actually talk a little bit and actually see the animals adapting to the freshness of the rainwater mixing with the saltiness of the tide pools. We found a Pacific oyster that has attached itself to this rock here. Now, Pacific oysters, even though the word Pacific is in its common name, they're actually invasive species. So these oysters were brought over from Japan during the gold rush era when our native oyster species, the Olympia oyster, were being over-harvested.
Down here we have what I call a sea star cuddle puddle. So there are a whole bunch of the ochre stars, or purple stars, down here, and I think I counted 8 of them. And they're all clustering really, really close together, and this actually helps them protect themselves. So if it was a really, really sunny day, this would help them keep some of the water inside so that they don't dry out. It's not very sunny here today, but they're still prepared for any type of threat that can come their way. And they're shielding themselves from the freshwater rain by being underneath this rock a little bit.
In this tide pool, I have found what looks to be a dinner table or kitchen scraps of empty clam shells. So taking a look at these shells, there's no holes, there's no cracks to show how these clams were open. So my best guess was it was a sea star. So sea stars, they have, some of them have 5 arms, some of them have more, but the ones that we've seen in the vicinity today all have 5 arms. Along their 5 arms, there are hundreds of tiny little tube feet that, like I said before, helps them anchor to rocks, but it also helps them stick to either side of their prey, which in this case was a clam, and then they'll slowly start to pry the clam open. So clams, like most bivalves, will have a muscle right here by the hinge called an abductor muscle, and that is what holds this animal's shell together. And like all muscles, it gets tired eventually. So as soon as this clam opens up even just a little, the sea star is able to take one of its 2 stomachs out of its body, slide it between the shell, and start digesting this animal right in its hard shell. So Aneka and I are now a lot closer to the edge of the ocean from where we started up there. And what we've noticed is that the animals here are much bigger, and you can find a lot more of them the closer you are to the water. Why is that, Aneka?
As the tide goes out, these ones will be exposed. So the ones higher up have to be exposed for longer times in the day. So they're more vulnerable to lots of predators. So they have to be small, or else someone will notice them. The little crab down here is a green shore crab. Sometimes people see a green crab and they worry that it might be the invasive European green crab. They look a little bit different. So you can see that this one, the carapace, the body is kind of squarish, and it doesn't have the little teeth, the little bumps along the edge. If it was an invasive species, it would have some of those teeth along the edge.
Thank you so much for joining Aneka and myself exploring 2 of our local beaches. We hope for Oceans Week Victoria you can celebrate with us by going out to your local beach and finding all of the different diversity of species near you. And you can also snap a photo and tag us at Oceans Week Victoria on Instagram and Facebook so that we can share everyone's adventure out on our local beaches.
If you like, you can also visit the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea out in Sydney. We're open 5 days a week, 10 till 4:30, so closed Wednesdays and Thursdays. But you can visit us on the other days if you like.
And be sure to check out all of the other events and activities at oceansweekvictoria.ca. Cheers, everyone!